welcome in. Tonight, we're gently drifting through the vast world of the Roman Empire, a civilization that stretched across continents and left traces that still surround us today. Before you get too cozy, you might like to leave a like, subscribe, or share a thought in the comments, and then simply settle in as we begin. At its greatest extent under Emperor Trajan in the early 2nd century CE, the Roman Empire spread across an enormous sweep of territory, touching Europe, North Africa, and Western Asia, wrapping around nearly Bore. The entire Mediterranean. That scale is part of what makes Rome so striking to imagine. It was not a small kingdom or a single cultural zone, but a huge connected world of cities, roads, ports, farms, armies, and languages, held together over vast distances. Roman rule lasted far longer in the eastern half of the empire than it did in the western half, with the Eastern Roman Empire continuing on as what historians call the Byzantine Empire, until 1453. That means the Roman imperial tradition survived for well over 1,000 years after the Western Empire fell. When people speak of the fall of Rome, they are usually speaking about only one part of a much longer Roman story. The Mediterranean was so central to Roman life that later writers called it Mare Nostrum, or our sea. This was not just a poetic phrase. The sea was the empire's great highway, linking provinces, carrying grain and oil, moving soldiers and merchants, and tying distant coasts into one imperial system. For the Romans, the Mediterranean was not the edge of the world. It was the middle of it. The Roman road network stretched for about 50,000 miles, or 80,000 kilometers, of hard-surfaced roads. These roads were one of the great achievements of Roman organization and engineering. They helped armies move quickly, officials travel reliably, and information flow across the empire. Even centuries later, some of their routes continued shaping the paths of medieval and modern roads. The city of Rome eventually had multiple aqueducts feeding its immense population and public spaces. These aqueducts brought in water for drinking, bathing, fountains, and sanitation on a scale that was extraordinary in the ancient world. They were not just technical works. They were one reason a city as large and demanding as Rome could function at all. Water abundance in Rome supported a bathing culture unmatched in most earlier ancient cities. Public baths were not rare luxuries for a few wealthy people. They became part of daily urban life, giving large numbers of people access to heated rooms, cold pools, washing facilities, and social gathering spaces. In a very real sense, Rome turned water into public comfort. Roman builders used concrete extensively, and this gave them the freedom to create vaults, domes, and large interior spaces that would have been far more difficult with older building methods alone. Concrete let Roman architecture become bolder, more expansive, and more experimental. It helped make possible many of the monumental forms that people still associate with Roman power. The arch, the vault, and the dome became signature features of Roman monumental architecture. These forms were not only visually impressive, they were practical engineering solutions that allow builders to span large spaces, support heavy structures, and create interiors that felt grand and open. Roman architecture often feels powerful because it combines beauty with structural confidence. Hadrian's Wall stretched about 73 miles, or 118 kilometers, across northern Britain. It remains one of the most memorable frontier monuments of the Roman world. The wall was not simply a barrier. It was a managed military landscape of forts, watchtowers, controlled gates, and patrol routes, showing how Rome organized and watched the edges of its empire. The Circus Maximus was one of the largest sports arenas in the Roman world, and in Julius Caesar's time, it was rebuilt to seat an estimated 150,000 spectators. That number gives some sense of the scale of Roman public entertainment. Massive crowds gathered there to watch chariot races, making it not only a place of sport, but also a place where rulers and the public faced one another in a shared spectacle. Chariot racing was among the most popular entertainments in Rome, and a standard race usually ran for 7 laps around the circus. The races were fast, dangerous, and thrilling to large crowds. Drivers handled light, fragile chariots at high speed, often rounding tight turns where crashes could happen suddenly and violently. Roman racing chariots were so light and delicate that collisions could be especially dangerous, and drivers were often wrapped into the reins, which made accidents even more deadly. A crash did not always mean a driver could simply jump free. This risk added to the excitement for spectators and to the remarkable courage required from the racers themselves. Gladiatorial shows began with funerary associations, but over time they grew into huge civic and state spectacles. What may have started as a ritual display connected to death and honor became a major form of mass entertainment. In the Roman world, spectacle could evolve from solemn tradition into organized public performance on an immense scale. The first known gladiatorial exhibition at Rome took place in 264 BCE and featured only 3 pairs of fighters. That small beginning is striking when compared with the much larger games of later centuries. It shows how Roman spectacle expanded over time, growing from limited ceremonial events into elaborate public entertainments backed by wealth, training, and political ambition. Animal hunts, known as venations, filled Roman amphitheaters with creatures brought from different parts of the empire. These spectacles turned imperial reach into visible display. When exotic animals appeared in the arena, the audience was not only watching a show, they were also seeing proof that Roman power extended into distant lands and could bring the wider world into the center of public entertainment. By the late Republic, ambitious Roman elites had turned public spectacles into political tools for gaining popularity. Games, shows, and entertainments were not merely gifts for fun. They were also investments in reputation. A politician who staged magnificent events could win admiration, gratitude, and public attention in a competitive political culture. Constantine later reshaped the empire by promoting Christianity and founding Constantinople as a new imperial capital. This was one of the most consequential changes in Roman history. It did not simply move political focus eastward. It also helped transform the religious and institutional identity of the empire for centuries to come. Constantinople was strategically placed between Europe and Asia, giving the Eastern Empire an extraordinary political and commercial center. Its location made it easier to control routes, defend key regions, and gather wealth from trade. Geography gave the city immense strength, and that strength helped the Eastern Empire endure long after the West had fragmented. The Eastern Empire survived because it was generally richer and institutionally stronger than the Western Empire. It had greater access to wealth, stronger urban centers, and a more durable administrative base. That combination of money, organization, and defensible geography made it better able to withstand the repeated pressures that overwhelmed the West. More than most ancient states, Rome left behind such a large quantity of roads, ruins, writings, laws, and languages that its world can still feel unusually close to the present. Many ancient civilizations are known through fragments, but Rome remains vividly present through surviving buildings, texts, legal traditions, and the many cultures shaped by its legacy. That closeness is one reason Rome continues to feel so alive in historical imagination. The Roman Empire formally began in 27 BCE when Augustus became Rome's first emperor after the collapse of the Republic. This moment did not erase Rome's past, but it marked a major political change. Power that had once been contested among Republican officers and elite families became increasingly centered in the hands of a single ruler. Romans often described Augustus's system as the Principate because he presented himself as the first citizen rather than as an open king. That language mattered. Romans had long distrusted kingship, so Augustus framed his power in a way that sounded modest, even while it was deeply transformative. The title helped disguise monarchy beneath familiar republican language. Rome ruled not only by conquest, but also by gradually bringing provincial elites into government and citizenship. This was one of the empire's great strengths. Rather than permanently excluding local leaders, Rome often gave them reasons to cooperate, advance, and become invested in imperial stability. The empire's power rested on a combination of roads, armies, taxation, urban administration, and maritime trade. No single element alone explains Roman success. Its strength came from systems working together: military force securing territory, roads carrying orders, taxes funding government, cities organizing life, and sea routes connecting the whole structure. Augustus brought a long stretch of relative stability after years of civil war, and later generations remembered his reign as the beginning of an age of peace. This peace was not the absence of all conflict, but it was a sharp contrast to the chaos that came before. Stability itself became one of Augustus's greatest political achievements. Roman emperors usually preserved many old republican titles and offices, even while concentrating real authority in their own hands. This helped create continuity. Outwardly, familiar institutions remained. In practice, however, the balance of power had shifted dramatically toward the emperor. The empire was never culturally uniform. It contained many languages, religions, customs, and regional traditions at the same time. This diversity was not a small detail on the margins. It was one of the empire's defining realities. Rome governed not a single culture, but a wide collection of local worlds tied together by imperial power. The city of Rome was both a political capital and an enormous consumer city that depended on the wider empire for food, wealth, labor, and spectacle. Rome drew resources inward from many provinces. In this sense, the capital was not self-sufficient. It was sustained by the labor, transport, and production of a much larger imperial world. Emperors used building programs to advertise power, generosity, and order, which is why so many rulers are remembered for construction as much as conquest. Buildings made authority visible. A temple, a forum, a bath complex, or an aqueduct could silently announce that the emperor had brought prosperity, stability, and magnificence to the people. Claudius became known for administrative reform and major public works, especially projects that benefited Italy and Rome. His reign shows that Roman emperors were not only warriors or ceremonial figures. They could also be active managers of infrastructure and governance, shaping how the empire functioned in everyday life. Nero patronized the arts, but he also lost the support of powerful elites and soldiers, and his death ended the Julio-Claudian dynasty. His reign is a reminder that Roman emperors depended on more than ceremony or title. Without support from the people who mattered most in politics and the military, even an emperor could fall. The year 69 CE, often called the Year of the Four Emperors, revealed how important army loyalty had become in imperial politics. The throne could no longer be thought of as secure by inheritance alone. Armies had become makers of emperors, and their backing could determine the direction of Roman history. The Flavian emperors restored stability after civil war and tied their legitimacy to military success and public monuments. They understood that power had to be demonstrated. Victory in war and visible generosity at home could help rebuild confidence after a period of instability. The so-called 5 good emperors are remembered for a long period of relative stability, administrative skill, and prosperity. Whether or not that label is perfectly fair, it reflects a real memory of order and competence. For many historians, this era represents the Roman Empire at its most balanced and effective. Hadrian preferred consolidation to reckless expansion and spent much of his reign traveling through the provinces. That choice tells us something important about Roman rule. An empire was not maintained by conquest alone. It also required inspection, presence, organization, and the careful management of what had already been won. Marcus Aurelius is remembered not only as an emperor, but also as a philosopher. That combination makes him stand out in Roman history. He ruled an empire while also reflecting deeply on duty, hardship, and the nature of human life, leaving behind a reputation shaped by thought as well as power. By the 3rd century, repeated military crises, inflation, and rapid changes of emperor made the empire much less predictable than it had been during its high point. The machinery of Rome still existed, but it was under strain. Stability became harder to maintain when leadership changed quickly and the economy grew more troubled. Diocletian reorganized imperial government because the empire had become too large and difficult for one ruler to manage in the old way. His reforms were a practical response to scale and crisis. A system that had worked in one age needed to be reshaped for a more demanding world. He divided administration between Eastern and Western spheres, helping create a more formal split in imperial rule. This did not instantly create two separate civilizations, but it did acknowledge that governing the empire required more than one center of control. The old unity of command had become increasingly hard to sustain. Diocletian also expanded bureaucracy and taxation to support a larger army and a more heavily managed state. These changes show how Rome adapted under pressure. A more threatened empire needed more revenue, more officials, and stronger structures of control, simply to keep functioning. In 301 C, Diocletian issued an edict on maximum prices in an effort to control inflation across the empire. The edict reveals a government trying to confront economic instability directly. It also shows that Roman rulers understood rising prices as more than an inconvenience. They saw them as a danger to social and political order. Roman emperors depended so heavily on military support that army loyalty often mattered more than hereditary succession. In practice, bloodline alone could not secure the throne. An emperor needed the backing of soldiers, and without it, his position could become fragile very quickly. Many emperors came from provincial families rather than old Roman aristocratic houses, which shows how the empire widened access to the highest office. This is one of the remarkable features of Roman imperial history. The center of power remained Roman, but the people who held that power increasingly came from across the empire. The empire's political system could look stable from a distance, yet underneath it remained vulnerable to usurpation and palace intrigue. Roman government projected order through titles, ceremonies, and institutions, but behind that formal surface there were often tensions, rivalries, and sudden struggles for power. Even so, Roman administration was resilient enough that the empire endured major crises and still lasted for centuries. That resilience is one of the most impressive facts about Rome. Again and again, it faced war, economic trouble, succession disputes, and regional pressure, yet its institutions kept adapting and surviving. Roman provinces were governed through a mixture of local elites, imperial officials, tax systems, and garrisons. Rome did not manage its territories by force alone. It used layered administration, allowing local leadership to remain important while ensuring imperial oversight and revenue collection. Rome often preferred to work through existing city institutions rather than wiping out local political life. This approach made rule more practical. Instead of rebuilding every region from nothing, Rome could incorporate older civic traditions into its own broader system of power. Urbanization was one of Rome's most important tools of empire because cities became centers of administration, taxation, law, and culture. A city was not just a settlement. It was a machine for organizing imperial life. Through cities, Rome could count, govern, tax, judge, and influence populations more effectively. Colonies planted Roman veterans and Roman-style institutions into conquered territory. These settlements helped spread Roman ways of life and tied newly conquered regions more closely to imperial structures. They were both social communities and instruments of long-term control. Provincial elites could rise by adopting Roman habits, learning Latin, serving the state, and seeking citizenship. This gave ambitious people in the provinces a path upward. Rome's system offered rewards, and those rewards helped turn local leaders into partners in empire. Roman citizenship was once limited, but over time it became much more widespread across the empire. This expansion changed what it meant to belong to Rome. Citizenship gradually became less exclusive and more imperial, extending legal status and identity far beyond the city of Rome itself. In 212 CE, the Edict of Caracalla granted Roman citizenship to all free inhabitants of the empire. This was a major legal turning point. It did not erase all social differences, but it greatly widened the formal community of Roman citizens and reshaped the legal map of the empire. That edict reduced the older distinction between Italians and many provincials in terms of legal status. The empire had long contained sharp differences between center and periphery, but this measure softened one of the most important of those divisions. In law, more people could now stand inside the Roman civic framework. Long before 212 CE, provincial people had already been entering Roman political and military life in growing numbers. The edict did not begin that process. It confirmed and extended developments that had been unfolding for generations, as the empire gradually became more inclusive in practice. The Roman Empire succeeded in part because it turned outsiders into stakeholders instead of ruling only through permanent exclusion. This may be one of the deepest explanations for its endurance. Rome could conquer, but it could also absorb. It knew how to turn former outsiders into participants in imperial life. Roman law became one of Rome's most lasting achievements because it gave the empire a more orderly way to manage everyday life. It created rules for property, contracts, inheritance, offices, and legal disputes in a way that was unusually detailed for the ancient world. This mattered because Rome ruled millions of people across many regions, and without a shared legal system, the empire would have been far harder to govern. Law gave structure to relationships between people, families, businesses, and the state. The praetor's annual edict helped shape Roman legal practice by announcing how judicial business would be handled. In simple terms, this meant that legal officials did not operate in total confusion or make everything up from scratch each day. They laid out procedures and expectations, helping people understand how disputes might be judged. Over time, this gave Roman law both flexibility and consistency, which is one reason it became so influential. Roman law carefully distinguished between different kinds of legal status, including citizens, non-citizens, freed people, and slaves. These distinctions were not minor details. They affected what rights a person had, what protections they could claim, how they could own property, and how the law treated them in disputes. This shows how Roman law was deeply connected to hierarchy, status, and social order. Family law gave the male head of the household remarkable authority over dependents. In the Roman world, the family was not seen only as a private emotional unit like many people imagine today. It was also a legal and economic structure. Because of that, family law shaped inheritance, property control, marriage, and the responsibilities of everyone tied to the household. In theory, a paterfamilias, or male head of the family, controlled family property and important legal decisions for the household. This authority could extend over children and other descendants in the male line. That does not mean every household was ruled in the same harsh way, but it does show that Roman family structure was built around a clear legal center of authority. The household was, in many ways, a small, governed world of its own. Adoption was politically important in Rome because it could create heirs, continue a family line, and transfer prestige. Adoption was not only about caring for a child without parents. Among Roman elites, it could be a deliberate political tool. It allowed wealth, family identity, and influence to continue when no suitable natural heir was available, and in some cases it shaped the future of the empire itself. Roman inheritance practices helped preserve elite wealth across generations. This gave powerful families a way to keep land, status, and resources within their own line. In a society where rank mattered deeply, inheritance was not just about passing on money. It was about protecting family standing and ensuring that influence would survive from one generation to the next. Law also supported commerce by defining contracts, debts, and obligations clearly enough for long-distance business. This was especially important in an empire where goods moved across provinces by road and sea. Traders and lenders needed some degree of predictability. Roman law helped provide that predictability, making it easier for people to trust agreements even when they were dealing with people far away. Roman legal thinking influenced later European legal systems so strongly that many ideas in later civil law traditions can be traced back to Rome. Even long after the empire itself changed or fell, Roman legal concepts continued to shape how later societies thought about ownership, obligation, procedure, and citizenship. In that sense, Roman law outlived Roman politics by many centuries. The empire's legal culture mattered because Rome ruled millions of people who needed dependable systems for taxes, disputes, contracts, and property. An empire of that size could not function only through force. It needed rules that people recognized, officials could apply, and institutions could maintain. Roman law helped create that stable framework. The Roman army was the backbone of imperial expansion and frontier control. It was not simply a fighting force that appeared only in moments of war. It was a permanent institution that guarded borders, supported imperial authority, and made Roman rule possible in distant regions. Without the army, the empire would have struggled both to grow and to hold together. A legion was the largest permanent Roman military organization and the key heavy infantry unit of imperial warfare. Legions were disciplined, highly structured, and central to Rome's military reputation. When people imagine Roman soldiers marching in order with shields and armor, they are often imagining the world of the legions, which formed the core of Rome's battlefield strength. In the imperial period, a legion was divided into cohorts and centuries under a professional hierarchy of officers. This organization made the army more than a crowd of armed men. It turned it into a system. Each layer of command helped maintain order, discipline, and coordination, which gave Roman armies a major advantage in training and battlefield control. Centurions were crucial middle-ranking officers who enforced discipline, trained soldiers, and led from the front. They were among the most important figures in the Roman army because they connected higher command to ordinary soldiers. Their work was practical and constant. They drilled men, maintained order, and made sure the army stayed effective in daily life as well as in battle. The Roman army relied not only on legionaries but also on auxiliaries recruited from non-citizen populations. This shows that Roman military strength came from many peoples across the empire, not from Italy alone. Auxiliaries helped fill military needs that legions could not meet by themselves, and their service tied provincial populations more closely to Roman power. Auxiliary units supplied much of the empire's cavalry, archers, and region-specific military skills that legions did not always provide as easily. Some regions had traditions of horse warfare, archery, or other forms of combat that Rome could make use of. In this way, the army became a place where local strengths were folded into a broader imperial machine. Military service could become a path to Roman citizenship for provincial recruits and their families. This is one of the clearest examples of how Rome linked service and reward. A soldier could give years of loyalty to the empire and, in return, gain legal and social advancement. This policy helped Rome strengthen both its army and its hold over the provinces. Roman armies also built roads, forts, bridges, and frontier systems, so soldiers served as engineers and laborers as well as fighters. Their role in the empire was broader than combat. They physically shaped landscapes, improved transport, and created the infrastructure that supported both military movement and civilian life. Military camps often grew into towns, leaving a long urban mark on provincial landscapes. When soldiers were stationed in one place for long periods, trade, housing, and local services often grew around them. Over time, these settlements could become lasting communities, showing how the army influenced urban development as well as defense. Because emperors depended on soldiers, generals with loyal armies could become emperors themselves. This made Roman politics deeply tied to military support. A powerful commander did not need only noble birth or political favor. If he had enough soldiers behind him, he might seize the throne or force a major change in power. Roman frontiers were not simple hard borders. They were wide zones filled with roads, forts, rivers, towers, customs points, diplomacy, and troop movement. This is important because modern people sometimes imagine borders as sharp lines on a map. Roman frontiers were more dynamic than that. They were managed spaces where control, trade, negotiation, and surveillance all took place. The word limes originally meant a powerful boundary marker, but later it came to mean fortified frontier lines. That changing meaning reflects the way Roman boundaries became increasingly organized and militarized. A frontier was not just a vague edge. It became a system of defended movement and monitored territory. Frontier policy usually aimed more at watching movement and regulating passage than at sealing territory completely. Rome often wanted to know who was crossing, trading, settling, or raiding. The goal was usually management, not total isolation. This made the frontier a place of control and contact at the same time. The purpose of Hadrian's Wall was not only to stop raids. It also helped regulate passage, display Roman power, and organize the frontier garrisons. In other words, it was both practical and symbolic. It made the Roman presence visible in stone while also helping the army manage who and what moved across that part of the border. Watchtowers, mile castles, and forts made Roman frontier defense highly structured and easy to monitor. This layered design allowed troops to observe movement, communicate warnings, and maintain a constant presence along key stretches of the frontier. It shows how Roman defense depended on organization as much as on force. Rivers such as the Rhine and Danube were major military frontiers because they could be patrolled and supplied more easily than open land. Waterways provided natural barriers, but they also served as transport routes. That dual role made them especially useful. A river frontier could separate regions while also helping Roman troops and supplies move efficiently. Rome often used diplomacy, subsidies, and client rulers along frontiers instead of relying only on direct annexation. This was a practical strategy. Not every neighboring people had to be conquered and absorbed. Sometimes it was more useful to influence them, pay them, or work through local rulers who supported Roman interests. Frontier forts brought Roman goods, baths, temples, and markets into areas far from the Mediterranean urban core. This meant that border zones were not only military outposts. They could also become centers of exchange and cultural blending. Roman life at the frontier often looked more mixed and connected than people might expect. The army's presence on the frontier made border regions places of cultural contact as well as military tension. Soldiers met traders, local populations, migrants, and envoys. Goods, ideas, and religious practices moved through these regions along with armies. Frontier life was often a meeting point between worlds. These roads were built mainly for military movement, not for leisure travel in the modern sense. Their first job was to move troops, supplies, and official communications quickly and reliably. Any benefit to merchants or ordinary travelers came second. This reminds us that Roman infrastructure was deeply tied to power and control. Roads linked forts, colonies, cities, ports, and provincial capitals, making imperial communication much faster. In a vast empire, distance could be a serious problem. Roads reduced that problem by creating predictable routes. They helped the state respond to threats, collect taxes, and maintain contact with distant regions. Milestones helped standardize distance and route information along major roads. This may seem simple, but it mattered a great deal. Standard markers made travel more understandable and manageable, especially for soldiers, officials, and messengers who needed to move efficiently through unfamiliar provinces. Good Roman roads could remain useful for centuries, and in some places they shaped later medieval and modern routes. This durability reflects both careful construction and intelligent planning. Roman roads were not temporary works, made only for immediate need. Many were built strongly enough to influence landscapes long after the empire itself changed. The cursus publicus was the imperial courier and transport system that operated along Roman roads. It was the empire's official movement network for messages, officials, and certain goods. This system helped the state stay informed and connected, making long-distance rule more realistic than it otherwise would have been. Relay stations along major routes allowed officials, messages, and tax revenues to move through the empire with impressive efficiency for the ancient world. These stations provided the practical support needed to keep communication flowing. Without them, even the best roads would have been much less effective. The postal system was supervised by the state, rather than run as a general public service for everyone. That is an important distinction. It existed first and foremost to serve government needs. Its structure reflects the priorities of empire: administration, control, revenue, and official coordination. The very existence of imperial roads and relay stations shows how much the empire depended on movement and logistics. Rome was not held together by prestige alone. It needed people, documents, taxes, food, and orders to keep moving. Logistics was one of the hidden foundations of Roman power. Roman engineering worked at an imperial scale, especially in roads, bridges, aqueducts, harbors, and public buildings. Roman builders were not only skilled craftsmen, they were planners who thought in terms of systems. Their work served military, civic, and economic purposes all at once, and many were designed to support large populations. Aqueducts were built to supply cities with abundant water for drinking, fountains, baths, and sanitation. This was not a luxury project. It was a practical response to the needs of dense urban life. Aqueducts allowed cities to function at a scale but would have been difficult without reliable fresh water. Roman engineers maintained extremely slight gradients over long distances so water could flow steadily by gravity. This required careful planning and measurement. The brilliance of the system lies partly in its simplicity. Once designed correctly, gravity did much of the work, letting water travel without pumps across long stretches of land. Much of an aqueduct's route actually ran underground or through low channels rather than across giant arches. Modern images often focus on the dramatic arcades, but those were only one part of the system. Most of the route was designed as quietly and efficiently as possible, using the landscape rather than always dominating it. Elevated arches were used mainly where valleys or uneven terrain made them necessary. This shows Roman engineering at its most practical. The arches were not only meant to impress, though they often did. They solved specific structural problems and allowed the water channel to maintain the right level across difficult ground. Roman engineering combined practical administration with visual grandeur, which is why public works often looked impressive while also solving ordinary civic problems. A bridge, aqueduct, or bath complex could be beautiful and useful at the same time. This balance between utility and display is one of the hallmarks of Roman design. Roman baths were social centers as much as places for washing. They were part of the rhythm of urban life, where people could meet, talk, relax, and spend time as well as clean themselves. In that sense, a bath complex was both an infrastructure system and a social institution. Large bath complexes usually included hot, warm, and cold rooms arranged in sequence. This layout created a structured experience for bathers. Moving through spaces of different temperatures was part of the design, and it reveals how carefully Roman public architecture could guide behavior and routine. Baths could also include exercise areas, gardens, lecture spaces, and places for conversation or reading. This made them much more than washing facilities. They became multi-purpose civic environments, where physical care, recreation, and social life could all happen together. Public bathing became one of the most distinctive habits of Roman urban life. It was woven into the culture of the city in a way that made Rome stand out from many earlier societies. The bath was not a rare treat. For many people, it was part of ordinary life. Emperors used giant bath complexes to advertise generosity and civic care. By providing spaces that the public could use and enjoy, rulers could present themselves as protectors and benefactors. Bath complexes therefore carried political meaning as well as practical value. Caracalla's name is especially connected with monumental baths in Rome. His great bath complex became one of the most famous examples of Roman public architecture. It demonstrates how an emperor could leave behind a legacy not just through war or law, but through a building that reshaped public life. Roman cities were filled with public monuments that shaped how people moved, gathered, and understood power. Buildings were not only practical structures, they were part of the message of empire. When people walked through a Roman city, they saw in stone and marble a world that announced order, rank, memory, and authority. Forums served as central spaces for politics, legal business, trade, and ceremony. They were not simply open squares. They were some of the most important public environments in Roman life, where people could watch civic activity unfold, hear legal matters, conduct business, and experience the public face of the state. Basilicas were large public halls used for legal and commercial activity, before the building form later became famous in Christian architecture. In the Roman world, a basilica was a place of administration and civic function. It gave people a covered interior space where important parts of public life could happen in an organized setting. Amphitheaters were freestanding oval or round buildings designed for spectacles such as gladiatorial contests and animal hunts. Their shape was highly effective because it allowed large crowds to gather around a central arena with clear views from many angles. The building itself helped create a shared experience of excitement, violence, and public display. Roman theaters differed from Greek theaters, in part because Roman design often emphasized more enclosed and carefully structured seating arrangements. This created a stronger sense of organized space and audience control. Roman architecture often aimed to shape how people entered, sat, watched, and understood their place within the crowd. Seating in Roman performance spaces reflected social hierarchy with great clarity. Where a person sat could say a great deal about status, privilege, and legal standing. In this way, architecture did more than hold an audience. It quietly sorted people and made the structure of society visible in physical space. Public architecture often communicated order by separating audiences according to class, gender, profession, nationality, or legal status. This was not random crowd management. It reflected a world in which social differences mattered deeply and were expected to be seen, reinforced, and maintained even during entertainment or ceremony. Roman monumental spaces were meant to be experienced collectively, making architecture part of social control as well as civic life. When thousands of people gathered in a carefully designed environment, the building helped shape their movement, their view, and their sense of belonging. Architecture became one of the tools by which empire organized public experience. Temples, arches, basilicas, theaters, and baths together created a distinctly Roman civic landscape. These were not isolated buildings scattered without meaning. Together they formed a recognizable pattern of urban life, one that helped people across distant provinces understand what Roman civic order looked like. Roman urban design gave physical form to ideas about rank, ceremony, memory, and authority. Streets and buildings were not neutral. They were part of how Roman society explained itself. Through design and placement, cities taught people where power stood, where public life happened, and how social order was supposed to be seen. Roman religion emphasized the correct performance of ritual more than private belief in the modern sense. What mattered deeply was doing things properly, using the right formulas, observing the correct ceremonies, and maintaining a stable relationship between the human community and the divine world. Religion was something practiced publicly and formally, not only felt inwardly. Traditional Roman worship focused on maintaining good relations with divine powers through proper acts, offerings, and ceremonies. The aim was not simply spiritual comfort. It was also social and civic stability. If rituals were carried out correctly, the community believed it was doing its part to preserve harmony between human society and the gods. Jupiter stood at the center of Roman state religion as a chief sky god and a symbol of public authority. His importance shows how closely religion and government were linked in Rome. Worship of major gods was not separate from politics. It was woven into the identity of the state itself. Roman religion absorbed influences from many outside sources over time, including Greek, Eastern, and local provincial cults. This flexibility helped Roman religion remain broad and adaptable. Instead of being completely fixed, it could grow, borrow, and blend, reflecting the wider diversity of the empire it served. Religion in the empire was layered rather than uniform, so local deities could continue to be worshipped alongside Roman ones. This meant that Roman rule did not always erase older traditions. In many places, local and imperial religious practices existed together, creating a more mixed and flexible sacred landscape. The imperial cult honored emperors, or the emperor's divine spirit, in ways that helped bind provinces to the imperial system. It was not exactly the same as ordinary worship of traditional gods, yet it played an important political role. It gave communities a shared way to express loyalty to imperial power through ritual. The imperial cult was especially useful for softening regional differences across a vast empire. In places with very different languages and customs, honoring the emperor could become one of the common public practices that linked them. It offered a symbolic center for loyalty that could stretch across many local identities. Roman armies also observed official religious ceremonies, showing how military life and ritual were connected. Soldiers were not only fighters. They were participants in the sacred framework of the state. This reinforced the idea that Rome's wars, victories, and defense of territory were tied to divine favor as well as human effort. Temples to Jupiter, to the imperial family, or to both could become symbols of civic loyalty in many cities. A temple was not just a religious site. It could also be a visible statement that a city belonged within the Roman world and recognized the authority of its sacred and political order. Religion in the empire was public, civic, and political as much as personal. Roman religion worked through ceremonies, buildings, officials, and festivals that involved communities as a whole. It was part of what held society together and gave public life a sacred frame. Christianity began as a minority religion within the Roman Empire and eventually transformed it. At first, it was one religious movement among many in a crowded imperial landscape. Over time, however, it grew into a force that reshaped the empire's institutions, values, and identity in lasting ways. Alexandria became a major intellectual center in Roman Egypt, where Christian theology developed in dialogue with Greek thought. This is important because Christianity did not spread only through simple preaching. It also developed through scholarship, argument, and interpretation in major urban centers shaped by older philosophical traditions. Thinkers such as Clement of Alexandria and Origen emerged from this Eastern Roman environment. Their work shows how Christian thought grew within the cultural world of the empire, using languages, methods, and educational traditions already present in Roman cities. Christian communities spread through Roman roads, ports, cities, and shared languages, rather than by one single path. This was one reason the religion could grow across such a large area. The empire's own communication and travel systems unintentionally helped carry new religious ideas from one place to another. The empire's urban network helped new religious movements travel quickly. Cities concentrated people, trade, ideas, and communication. Once a movement reached major urban centers, it had a better chance of spreading outward through social and commercial connections. Roman schools and literary culture shaped Christian writing, especially in rhetoric and interpretation. Christian authors did not write in a vacuum. Many worked within educational traditions already shaped by Roman and Greek learning, and this influenced how they argued, explained, and organized religious ideas. By late antiquity, Christianity and Roman administration had become closely linked. What began as a minority religion eventually moved into the center of imperial life, influencing leadership, institutions, and law. This was one of the greatest transformations in Roman history. Traditional cults did not disappear all at once. For long periods, older religious systems and Christianity existed side by side. This gradual overlap reminds us that religious change in the empire was a long, uneven process rather than a sudden, clean break. Roman religion in the imperial age was therefore a changing mixture rather than a frozen set of ancient practices. New influences, local traditions, imperial rituals, and Christianity all shaped the religious world over time. The sacred life of the empire was constantly being adjusted and redefined. The religious history of the empire is a story of adaptation, competition, and slow transformation. Different beliefs and practices did not simply replace one another overnight. They overlapped, challenged one another, and evolved within the structures of Roman society. Agriculture remained the foundation of the Roman economy throughout the empire's history. However grand Roman cities and armies may seem, the empire rested on land, harvests, and the labor needed to work them. Farming was not a side activity. It was the base that supported nearly everything else. Roughly 4/5 of the population probably worked the soil. That enormous share of the population tells us what kind of world the Roman Empire really was. It was, above all, an agrarian civilization, where most people lived close to the land and spent their lives in labor tied to seasons and crops. This heavy dependence on agriculture meant that even a powerful empire still depended on ordinary harvests and the people who produced them. Urban greatness, imperial monuments, and military campaigns all rested on something much simpler and more fragile: food production. Roman estates ranged from small holdings to large properties worked by tenants, laborers, and enslaved people. The countryside was not socially uniform. Different regions and estates operated in different ways, but across the empire, land ownership and agricultural labor remained central to wealth and status. Writers such as Cato and Varro described estate management, tools, and the labor required to run farms efficiently. Their writings show that agriculture in Rome was carefully observed and discussed. Landowners wanted to organize work, improve output, and manage rural resources with practical attention. Roman farming did not undergo major labor-saving industrial revolutions, so food production continued to demand enormous human effort. Most work still relied on hands, animals, and simple tools. This helps explain why agricultural labor remained such a large part of life across the empire. Grain was especially important because dense urban populations depended on a steady supply of bread. In large cities, bread was not just food. It was a matter of public order. A disruption in grain supply could quickly become a social and political problem. Olive oil and wine were also major staples of production and trade in many provinces. These products mattered not only for diet, but also for commerce. They were moved across the empire in large quantities and became part of the everyday material culture of Roman life. Regional specialization mattered, so different provinces became known for particular crops and products. This made the Roman economy more interconnected. One area might focus on grain, another on oil, another on wine or trade, and together they formed a larger system of exchange. The Roman economy was local in daily life, but imperial in the wider circulation of staple goods. Most people lived in local communities and depended on nearby land, yet at the same time, the empire linked distant producers and consumers into broad networks of supply. Rome's grain supply became a major administrative concern because feeding huge urban populations was politically essential. A capital city could not remain calm or stable without bread. This meant that the state had to take food supplies seriously as part of governance. Egypt was one of the great grain-producing regions of the empire. Its fertile lands made it exceptionally valuable to Roman rule. Control of Egypt was not only prestigious, it was deeply practical because it helped support the food needs of major urban centers. Under Roman rule, part of Egypt's grain surplus was directed toward feeding imperial capitals. This meant that the productivity of one region could sustain the population of a distant city. It is one of the clearest examples of how the empire moved essential resources across large distances. A later imperial edict placed Egypt's grain surplus at about 8 million artabs, roughly 300 million liters of wheat. Numbers like this help show the massive scale of Roman food logistics. The empire did not feed its cities casually. It depended on agricultural movement at a truly enormous level. North Africa and Sicily were also crucial parts of the Roman grain system. Rome did not rely on only one source. Several important regions helped support the wider food network, making grain supply a broad imperial concern rather than a local matter. Control of grain-producing provinces was a matter of political survival as much as economics. A ruler who could not secure food could face unrest, weakness, and loss of legitimacy. In this way, bread and power were closely connected in Roman life. Grain moved by sea far more efficiently than by land, which made maritime routes essential to imperial stability. Heavy bulk goods are difficult to move over long distances by road, so ships became the most practical way to sustain large urban populations from distant provinces. The state's involvement in grain supply shows that Roman government intervened directly when social peace depended on food. This was not a purely free market system left to chance. The government understood that food security was too important to ignore. Ports, warehouses, officials, and shipping networks formed the hidden machinery behind urban bread. When people in a great city received grain or bread, That simple daily reality depended on a much larger network of administration, storage, transport, and labor. The grain system shows that an empire can be held together by logistics just as much as by armies. Military force made conquest possible, but supply systems made large-scale urban life sustainable. Bread, ships, warehouses, and officials were as important to stability as soldiers. Roman coinage helped standardize exchange across a huge territory. Shared coin types made trade, taxation, and payments more understandable across regions. Money allowed people in very different places to participate more easily in a connected imperial economy. Rome did not develop true coinage until the 3rd century BCE, even though later stories projected it into an earlier past. This reminds us that Roman institutions often developed gradually. Things that later seem ancient and timeless often had specific historical beginnings. Governments defined coin weights and metal content, which made money a tool of state control as well as commerce. Coins were not just useful objects for exchange. They were also regulated instruments whose value depended partly on political authority. Roman coins often carried portraits, titles, victories, and symbols that worked like miniature messages of imperial power. A coin could travel widely and silently spread the image of a ruler. It was a practical object, but it also served as propaganda in everyday life. Because coins moved so widely, imperial imagery could travel farther than many statues or monuments. A person who never saw the emperor in life might still handle his portrait in daily transactions. Coins helped make imperial presence feel constant and familiar. Debasement and inflation became serious problems during periods of crisis in the Roman Empire. When the metal content of coins changed and confidence in money weakened, prices could rise and economic life became less stable. For ordinary people, this meant that the value of what they earned or saved could become uncertain. For the government, it meant that paying troops, collecting taxes, and maintaining order became much more difficult. Diocletian's edict on maximum prices shows that Roman rulers understood inflation as a real threat to imperial stability. The government tried to respond by setting limits on what goods and services could cost. This reveals a state that was not simply watching economic trouble from a distance. It was actively trying to control it, even if such controls were hard to enforce in practice across such a huge empire. Taxes could be paid, and debts could be settled within legal frameworks shaped by Roman monetary policy. In other words, Roman money was not only for buying and selling in markets. It was also tied to government systems, law courts, and the larger administrative life of the empire. Money connected daily exchange to the formal authority of the state. Roman coins are now one of the richest surviving sources for understanding imperial propaganda, economic history, and chronology. A single coin can reveal the image of a ruler, the titles he used, the victories he celebrated, and the messages he wanted people to see. Because coins were minted so widely and used so often, they preserve a broad and detailed record of Roman power. In the Roman world, money was never just an economic tool. It was also administrative and symbolic. It helped governments collect taxes and pay armies, but it also carried political messages and reinforced the presence of imperial authority in ordinary daily transactions. Every coin was both useful and meaningful. The Roman treasury, known as the aerarium, was located near the Temple of Saturn in the Forum. This location placed financial administration at the very heart of public and political life in Rome. The treasury was not hidden away in some distant place. It stood in one of the most important civic spaces of the city, reflecting the close connection between money, religion, and government. Under the Republic, the treasury was managed by quaestors and was, in theory, under the control of the Senate. This arrangement reflected the older republican balance of offices and institutions. Financial power was part of the broader political system, and control of public funds mattered deeply because money underpinned military campaigns, administration, and public life. Imperial rule gradually created more direct forms of fiscal control under the emperor. As power became concentrated, so did the management of revenue and expenditure. This shift tells us that imperial government was not only about titles and ceremony. It also meant practical control over the financial systems that kept the empire running. Taxes were drawn from land, people, trade, and provincial production. Roman revenue did not come from one single source. Instead, it was gathered through a broad range of obligations tied to ownership, labor, movement of goods, and regional output. This wide base of taxation helped support the enormous demands of empire. Diocletian introduced taxes on agricultural land and on individuals as part of his wider reforms. These measures were designed to make revenue collection more systematic and dependable. In a time of pressure and instability, the state needed better ways to measure what it could collect and how it could support the army and administration. His standardization of a 5-year census helped increase state revenue by making populations and resources easier to count and assess. A census was not only about knowing who lived where. It was also a tool of government, allowing Rome to organize taxation more effectively and keep closer track of its subjects and their obligations. Taxation was necessary to support armies, bureaucracy, building projects, and public distributions. The empire's visible grandeur rested on constant financial input. Roads, forts, courts, officials, and grain systems all required money. Taxes were therefore not a secondary part of Roman life. They were one of the foundations of imperial survival. Provincial taxation could be heavy, especially in times of war or economic strain. For those living far from Rome, imperial rule could mean regular fiscal pressure. This reminds us that the empire's strength had a human cost. The resources that supported armies and rulers had to come from real communities and real labor. Yet the Roman state could not function without regular revenue, because empire was expensive to maintain. Border defense, public works, administration, and supply systems all required steady income. A weak tax base meant a weak state, so fiscal control became increasingly important as imperial demands grew. Roman fiscal history shows that administrative sophistication grew as the empire faced greater military and political pressure. As problems became more serious, the state responded with more structure, more oversight, and more effort to measure and control resources. Fiscal reform was one way Rome tried to survive changing times. Trade connected the Roman Empire from the Atlantic to the Near East. This vast commercial world linked different climates, products, cultures, and cities through routes on land and sea. Trade did not erase local life, but it did create a wider imperial marketplace in which distant regions could become economically connected. Palmyra became a major caravan city linking the Roman world with Mesopotamia and routes extending farther east. Its location allowed it to benefit from overland trade across difficult landscapes. Palmyra shows that wealth in the Roman world did not come only from farming or sea trade. Desert routes could also support remarkable prosperity. Syria's prosperity depended in part on organizing caravan trade through cities such as Palmyra, Damascus, Bostra, and Petra. These urban centers acted as hubs that gathered, managed, and redirected goods moving across long distances. Their importance reminds us that trade often depended on cities that could coordinate movement and provide services. Palmyra's wealth from trade helped finance its monumental colonnades and temples. In this way, commerce shaped the look of the city itself. Stone architecture became visible proof of economic success. The beauty and scale of Palmyra's monuments were closely tied to its role in long-distance exchange. Trade in the empire included not only luxury goods, but also food, cloth, oil, wine, metalwork, glass, and ordinary household items. Roman commerce was not limited to rare treasures for elites. It also involved the practical goods that supported daily life, showing how broad and varied imperial trade could be. Roman roads supported overland exchange, but sea trade was usually cheaper for moving bulk cargo. This is one reason the Mediterranean mattered so much. Large quantities of goods could be carried more efficiently by ship than by wagon, making ports and maritime routes essential to the empire's economy. Ports and rivers connected inland and maritime economies. They acted as transition points where goods could move between ships, river traffic, and land transport. This made them especially valuable because they linked different systems of movement into one broader network of exchange. Commercial traffic spread styles, religions, technologies, and foods along with goods. Trade did not move objects alone. It also carried habits, ideas, and cultural influences. Merchants, travelers, and port cities helped make the Roman world a place of contact and blending as much as exchange. The empire's size gave merchants access to an enormous market, even though conditions varied sharply from one region to another. The trader could potentially sell or transport goods across great distances under the broad shelter of Roman rule. That large connected market was one of the advantages of imperial stability. Roman trade worked best where state security, roads, and ports reduced the risks of movement. Commerce depends on trust and safety, and Roman power helped to provide both in many places. This was one of the reasons trade could flourish. Infrastructure and order lowered the uncertainty of travel and transport. Slavery was deeply woven into Roman society and the Roman economy. It was not a marginal institution affecting only a few households or estates. Enslaved labor appeared in many parts of life, from domestic service to agriculture and business. To understand Rome honestly, slavery has to be seen as central rather than peripheral. Enslaved people lived and worked in households, workshops, farms, businesses, and cities across the empire. Their labor was present in both rural and urban settings. This wide range of roles shows how deeply slavery was built into Roman daily life and how many parts of society depended on it. Ownership of enslaved people was not limited to the richest elites. While great landowners and wealthy households may have held large numbers, slavery also extended into broader levels of society. This made it a widespread social institution, not simply a luxury of the very highest class. Roman law treated slaves as property and denied them most of the rights held by free persons. This legal status is crucial to understanding Roman slavery. It meant that enslaved people were not recognized as independent legal actors in the same way free citizens were. Their lives were controlled by ownership and power. Many enslaved people in classical systems were outsiders brought in through war, trade, or coercion from elsewhere. This helps explain why slavery in Rome was so closely tied to conquest. Expansion created captives, and those captives could be turned into labor within the empire. Slavery in Rome was therefore directly connected to imperial conquest and expansion. Military victories did not only bring land and glory, they also brought human beings into systems of forced labor. In that sense, Roman expansion fed Roman slavery. The daily lives of enslaved people varied widely depending on their work, location, and owner, but all remained legally unfree. Some may have lived in households, some in workshops, some on rural estates, yet none of these differences changed the essential condition of bondage. Variation in experience did not erase the fact of coercion. Some enslaved people could be manumitted and become freed persons, although their social position often remained marked by dependence and stigma. Freedom could change a person's legal status and open some new possibilities, but it did not always erase the memory or consequences of enslavement. Roman society continued to notice those distinctions. Rome's prosperity cannot be understood without acknowledging the scale of coerced labor within it. Wealth, agriculture, domestic service, and parts of commerce all depended to some degree on people who did not work freely. The beauty and order of Roman civilization were built in part on unfree labor. Roman society normalized slavery far more deeply than many modern people expect when they picture the classical world. Modern admiration for Roman law, roads, or art can sometimes hide this reality. But slavery was not an exception within Roman life. It was one of its structural foundations. The Roman family was organized around strong legal and social authority vested in the paterfamilias. The household was not simply a private space for affection and daily living. It was also a legal institution with a clear center of power, and that shaped how property, inheritance, obedience, and family life functioned. Patria potestas gave the male head of the family legal authority over children and descendants in the male line. This legal concept made family power unusually formal and far-reaching. It reflected a world in which authority within the household mirrored larger Roman ideas about order and control. In its older form, this paternal authority could, in theory, extend to extremely severe powers. That does not mean every family lived out the harshest version of the law, but it does show how deeply Roman legal thought placed the household under male authority. Family order was treated as a serious matter of status and control. Household structure linked law, property, kinship, and social rank in a very direct way. The family was not only about blood relations. It was also the framework through which wealth was managed, names were continued, and authority was passed on. This made the household a basic unit of Roman society. Marriage among elites often had political and social importance beyond private affection. A marriage could strengthen alliances, protect status, and link families with power or wealth. This helps explain why family life among Roman elites cannot be understood only in personal terms. It was also part of public strategy. Roman women did not hold formal political office, but elite women could still shape family alliances, patronage, and social memory. Their influence often worked through family networks, marriage, reputation, and the management of household relationships. Even without official office, they could matter greatly in elite society. Domestic space in elite houses also served as a stage for status display. Visitors entering such a house could immediately sense wealth, taste, and authority through architecture and decoration. The house was not only where people lived, it was where they presented themselves to the world. Multiple generations, dependents, clients, and enslaved workers could all be tied into the same household structure. This made the Roman household broader and more socially layered than the smaller family unit many people imagine today. A house could be a center of labor, patronage, kinship, and hierarchy all at once. Roman family authority was therefore much broader than the modern idea of a small nuclear household. It extended through generations and across different levels of dependence. The Roman family was a social institution with legal force, economic importance, and public meaning. The home was not just private space. It was also part of the machinery of status and social power. Through hospitality, display, household management, and family structure, the house helped support the wider order of Roman society. Roman housing reflected enormous differences in wealth. Some people lived in large, decorated private homes, while others lived in much more crowded and practical urban conditions. Housing makes social inequality very visible because it turns wealth differences into physical space. The domus was a private single-family residence that could range from modest to extremely grand. In its larger forms, it was not only a place to sleep and eat. It was also a place to receive visitors, display rank, and manage household life in a highly structured environment. A typical domus was organized around an atrium and a peristyle. These spaces gave Roman houses a recognizable internal layout. The atrium often served as a central reception area, while the peristyle created a more open and often garden-like interior space deeper within the house. Elite homes used decoration, sculpture, and painted rooms to impress visitors and communicate status. Walls, floors, and furnishings helped make the house itself into a statement. The design of the home was a language of rank, telling others who the owner was and how important he wished to appear. The insula, by contrast, was the main type of practical housing in crowded urban districts. These buildings remind us that most city life was not lived in luxury. The insula was part of the ordinary urban fabric, offering more economical forms of residence in densely populated neighborhoods. Insulae were especially associated with the laboring population and with the denser, noisier side of city life. These buildings helped house people who could not afford the space and privacy of elite homes. They remind us that the Roman city was not made up only of grand villas and marble halls. Much of it was built around practical survival in crowded environments. Ground floors in dense Roman housing blocks could contain shops or businesses, with living quarters above. This meant that work and domestic life were often physically connected. A person might sell goods or run a trade below and live just overhead. Roman cities often mixed commerce and residence in ways that made the street itself feel like an extension of daily household life. Roman cities therefore blended business and residence very closely. A neighborhood was not neatly divided into separate zones for work, shopping, and home, the way many modern cities are. Instead, the same building or street could serve all of these purposes at once, creating a lively and layered urban environment. Houses were social statements as much as shelters, especially for elites who used domestic display to advertise authority. The arrangement of rooms, the style of decoration, and the size of reception areas all communicated a message. A house could silently tell visitors about wealth, family standing, and political importance before a single word was spoken. Domestic architecture makes the gap between imperial wealth and ordinary urban life very visible. At one end were spacious homes with gardens, art, and carefully designed reception spaces. At the other were crowded housing blocks built for practicality. Looking at Roman homes makes social inequality easier to picture in a concrete way. Roman painting survives mainly as wall painting on plaster, especially frescoes from houses and villas. This is one reason wall decoration is so important for understanding Roman visual culture. Paintings that were fixed to walls often had a better chance of lasting than portable artworks, giving modern historians a rich glimpse into interiors that once felt vivid and alive. Much of what is known about Roman painting comes from preserved interiors in places such as Pompeii. When volcanic ash sealed buildings and rooms, it also protected scenes, colors, and artistic details that might otherwise have vanished completely. Because of this, Pompeii offers an unusually intimate look into the visual world of Roman domestic life. Roman painted walls could show architecture, villas, gardens, landscapes, rivers, and coastlines. These paintings did more than decorate blank surfaces. They could visually open a room, create the illusion of distance, and surround a person with scenes of nature or elegant built spaces. A wall could become a kind of window into another imagined world. Pliny credited the painter Studius with charming wall scenes of gardens and landscapes. This detail shows that Romans valued not only grand mythological art, but also scenes that brought gentle beauty into indoor life. Garden paintings in particular suggest a desire to make enclosed spaces feel more open, peaceful, and connected to nature. Portable Roman paintings probably existed in great numbers, but wall frescoes survived better because plaster endured. This means that what we know today is shaped partly by chance. The Roman world almost certainly had more painting than has survived, yet it is the fixed decoration of houses and villas that gives us the clearest surviving record. Wall painting could make interiors seem larger and more open than they really were. Artists used perspective, architecture, color, and illusion to turn flat surfaces into imagined depth. In this way, painting did practical emotional work. It shaped how a room felt to someone sitting, walking, or resting inside it. Roman visual culture combined realism, ideal beauty, and political symbolism. Portraits could be strikingly lifelike, yet monuments and images could also present rulers or elites in idealized ways. Roman art was not simply about copying reality. It balanced observation with messages about authority, dignity, power, and memory. Portrait busts of emperors helped spread recognizable imperial faces across the empire. In regions very far from Rome, a person might never see the emperor in real life, yet could still know what he was supposed to look like. This mattered because visual familiarity helped make imperial power feel present, even at a distance. Sculpture, silverware, glass, jewelry, and decorated pottery all formed part of Roman material culture. Art in the Roman world was not limited to statues in public spaces. It also appeared in household goods, personal objects, and daily utensils, blending beauty and status with ordinary life. Roman art was not isolated from daily living. It filled houses, baths, temples, tombs, and public spaces. This is one reason Roman visual culture feels so rich. Art was woven into the environments people moved through every day, not reserved only for rare ceremonial places. Latin was the language of Roman administration, law, and much elite literature in the Western Empire. This gave it immense practical importance. It was the language through which orders were issued, legal concepts were expressed, and much formal public life was carried out, especially in the West. The Romance languages ultimately developed from Latin. This means that Rome's linguistic legacy did not end with the empire itself. Over many centuries, spoken Latin changed and developed into new languages, carrying Roman influence into the modern world in one of the clearest possible ways. Literary Latin in the 1st century BCE valued elegance, clarity, and a rejection of coarse or rustic style. Writers and teachers cared deeply about polished expression. Language was not just a tool for communication. It was also a mark of education, refinement, and social standing. Greek remained extremely important in the Eastern Empire, and among educated Romans more broadly. The Roman world was never simply Latin-speaking in every part. Greek had deep cultural prestige and practical usefulness, especially in the East, where it remained a major language of learning and public life. Roman education drew heavily from Hellenistic models, especially in grammar and rhetoric. This shows that Roman culture was deeply shaped by earlier Greek traditions. Roman elites did not build their educational system from nothing. They adapted and adopted systems that had already been highly developed. Grammatici taught grammar and literature and helped define what counted as proper language. Their work was important because education in Rome involved more than reading and writing at a basic level. It also involved learning how to speak and interpret texts in ways that reflected cultural standards. Higher Roman education centered strongly on rhetoric because public speaking remained socially and politically valuable. In a world where law, politics, and status often depended on persuasion, speaking well was a form of power. Rhetoric was therefore not an ornamental skill. It was a practical path to influence. Vespasian created state-supported chairs of Greek and Latin rhetoric in Rome. This reveals how important advanced education had become to public life. It also shows the state recognizing the value of formal instruction in language and persuasion, both of which mattered deeply in Roman elite culture. Quintilian became one of the most famous Roman teachers of rhetoric and educational theory. His reputation reflects the importance of teaching in shaping Roman elites. He was not just training people to speak well. He was helping define what a well-educated Roman should sound like and how such a person should be formed. Roman schooling influenced not only elite careers in its own time, but also later Christian and medieval educational traditions. The classroom habits, literary methods, and rhetorical priorities of Rome survived in new forms long after the empire changed. In this way, Roman education had a very long afterlife. Roman food culture was more varied than the stereotype of endless elite feasting suggests. While banquets certainly existed and could be elaborate, most Roman eating was tied to ordinary staples and practical needs. To understand Roman food honestly, it helps to look beyond the famous scenes of luxury. Bread, wine, and olive oil were core staples of the Roman diet in many regions. These foods appeared again and again in Roman life because they were practical, nourishing, and deeply embedded in agriculture and trade. Together, they formed part of the basic texture of daily eating. Garum, a fermented fish sauce, was one of the most common Roman condiments. It may sound unusual to modern ears, but in Roman cooking, it played an important role in adding flavor. It was used so widely that it became one of the most distinctive ingredients of Roman cuisine. Romans used garum so frequently that later comparisons often liken it to modern all-purpose savory seasonings. This gives a clearer sense of its place in the kitchen. It was not just a niche luxury item. It was part of the flavor structure of many dishes and could appear across different levels of dining. The cookbook tradition associated with Apicius shows that elite Roman cuisine drew ingredients from across the known world. Roman cooking at higher levels of society could be complex, varied, and cosmopolitan. Recipes and ingredient choices reveal a dining culture shaped by trade, wealth, and curiosity. Imported spices could appear in Roman cooking, especially among wealthier diners. This reminds us that food was also a display of status. The ability to serve ingredients that had traveled long distances suggested access, expense, and refinement in the social setting of a meal. Food shops, wine shops, and workshops for items such as garum appear in the archaeological record of Pompeii. This gives a vivid picture of urban food life. Roman cities were full of places where people could buy, sell, prepare, and consume food, showing that eating was supported by a lively commercial world. Roman dining had a strong social dimension, especially in elite banquets where display mattered as much as nourishment. A meal could be a performance of status, hospitality, and taste. The arrangement of guests, the sequence of dishes, and the atmosphere of the room all carried social meaning. Ordinary diet varied by status and place, so imperial luxury cuisine should not be mistaken for everyday eating. Many Romans lived simple food lives centered on staples, local products, and practical needs. The grandeur of elite banquets represents only one layer of Roman food culture. Food in the Roman Empire reveals how empire expanded not only territory, but also taste. Trade routes, regional products, and cultural contact all shaped what people ate and how they seasoned it. In that sense, imperial power changed the kitchen as well as the map. Roman Egypt prospered under the peace imposed by Roman rule, even though it was tightly controlled politically. This combination of prosperity and strong oversight is typical of empire. Roman government extracted value, but it also created conditions in which agriculture, trade, and urban life could flourish. Alexandria remained one of the empire's great intellectual and commercial cities. It was important not only because of its size, but because of its role in connecting scholarship, trade, and imperial administration. Cities like Alexandria show how Roman power could be tied to already ancient and sophisticated urban centers. Egypt's bureaucratic and documentary culture gives historians unusually rich evidence for Roman provincial life. Because so many records survived, Egypt offers a detailed window into taxation, administration, local disputes, and daily routine. It is one of the places where the Roman Empire becomes especially visible in fine detail. A village clerk at Karanis in Roman Egypt left evidence of deep engagement with Greek literary culture. This detail is valuable because it shows that literary life was not limited to famous philosophers in major capitals. Even local officials in provincial settings could participate in wider traditions of reading and learning. Roman Syria prospered through agriculture, industries, and caravan trade. This combination made it economically diverse. It was not dependent on a single source of wealth, but benefited from both local production and its role in wider exchange networks. Palmyra's rise shows how desert-edge cities could become rich by managing long-distance trade rather than relying mainly on farming. Geography did not always limit prosperity. In some cases, being located at a crossroads of movement made a city unusually valuable and successful. Roman Britain developed its own provincial identity while still participating in the larger empire. This is important because provinces were never just copies of Rome. They adapted Roman rule to local conditions, creating regional versions of Roman life shaped by both imperial influence and local tradition. North Africa became one of the empire's major grain-producing regions and was strategically vital. Its productivity made it important far beyond its own local setting. A province that could help feed major populations held real political weight within the imperial system. Provincial diversity was so great that no single local culture can stand for the empire as a whole. The Roman world included desert caravan cities, Atlantic frontiers, Nile communities, Italian capitals, and much more. Any simple picture of Roman culture leaves out this remarkable variety. The Roman Empire is best understood not as one culture repeated everywhere, but as a system linking many local worlds. What made it Roman was not total sameness. It was the way roads, laws, armies, cities, taxes, and shared institutions connected very different places into one imperial structure. Roman emperors used public games to mark major anniversaries and sacred cycles, as well as to entertain crowds. These events were not merely diversions. They also gave rulers a way to connect public emotion, ritual timing, and political display in a single, powerful experience. The secular games are clearly attested in 249 BCE, 146 BCE, and under Augustus in 17 BCE. These celebrations were associated with renewal and long cycles of time, giving them a significance beyond ordinary festivals. They linked public ceremony with the idea of historical turning points. Horace composed his Carmen Saeculare for the Augustan celebration of the secular games. This shows how literature, ritual, and imperial politics could be brought together. Poetry was not always separate from public life. It could be written for major civic moments that carried political meaning. Such festivals tied imperial ideology to ideas of renewal, destiny, and the passing of generations. They did more than entertain or honor the gods. They helped shape how people imagined Rome's place in time, presenting the empire as part of a larger historical and sacred order. Roman public ritual often blended religion, entertainment, and politics into a single event. A festival or ceremony could honor the gods, impress the people, and strengthen the ruler's image all at once. This blending is one of the striking features of Roman public life. The city of Rome itself became a ceremonial stage where emperors displayed victory, piety, and generosity. Processions, monuments, games, and festivals all helped turn the capital into a place where power could be seen and felt. The city was not only governed, it was also performed. Monumental arches, Public games, processions, and distributions helped shape how imperial power appeared to the people. Authority in Rome was not based only on law or force. It was also built through repeated public experiences that taught people what imperial rule looked like. Because most people never met the emperor privately, spectacle was one of the main ways imperial rule became emotionally real. A ruler could feel distant in geography and status, but public ceremonies, coins, monuments, and games brought his image and power into common view. Roman ceremonies were carefully organized to make hierarchy visible. People saw who stood where, who received honor, who gave offerings, and who controlled access to the center. Ritual was one of the ways Roman society displayed its structure openly. This theatrical side of empire mattered because public impression could be nearly as important as policy. People respond not only to laws and taxes, but also to symbols, rituals, and visible acts of power. Rome understood this deeply, and it used public performance to reinforce rule. Bath architecture reflected Roman skill at moving large numbers of people through public space in an orderly way. A major bath complex was not just a collection of hot and cold rooms. It was carefully planned so that thousands of people could enter, circulate, wash, relax, and leave with surprising efficiency. This tells us something gentle but important about Rome. Even comfort could be organized on an imperial scale. Clean water, heating technology, and public design came together in Roman baths in a way that made them true civic showcases. The baths were not impressive because of one invention alone, but because several systems worked together at once. Water had to arrive in abundance, rooms had to be heated, and the whole building had to serve the needs of crowds. In that sense, the bath was a quiet masterpiece of coordination. Bathing in the Roman world was not a minor luxury set aside for rare occasions. In many cities, it became part of ordinary routine and daily expectation. That makes Roman baths especially revealing. They show a society that, at least in its urban centers, tried to make certain forms of comfort, cleanliness, and sociability widely accessible. Roman baths also help explain why the empire invested so heavily in water infrastructure. Aqueducts, channels, fountains, and storage systems were not abstract engineering achievements. They supported real habits of life. When a city built for bathing at scale, it committed itself to a vast and ongoing effort to bring water where people needed it. The Western Roman Empire gradually weakened under pressure from both internal instability and external invasions. Its decline was not caused by one single disaster. Instead, a long chain of political struggles, military threats, and economic problems slowly reduced its ability to respond effectively. The weakening was real, but it was also gradual. Ancient writers and later historians have pointed to corruption, abuse of power, weak soldiery, and the alienation of urban elites as some of the problems that contributed to Western decline. These issues matter because they show that an empire can suffer not only from outside enemies, but also from strains within its own institutions. A state becomes fragile when confidence in leadership and civic loyalty begins to erode. Rome was sacked by the Visigoths in 410, and the event carried a deep symbolic shock, even though the empire did not end immediately afterward. For many people, the idea that the city of Rome itself could be entered and plundered felt almost unthinkable. The sack mattered not only for its direct damage, but also for what it revealed about changing power. In 476, Odoacer deposed Romulus Augustulus, who is traditionally described as the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire. This date is often used as a landmark in history, not because everything changed overnight, but because it marked the end of imperial rule in the West in a formal and memorable way. The Eastern Empire survived because it was generally richer and institutionally stronger than the Western Empire. Greater access to revenue, stronger cities, and more stable administrative structures gave it resilience. In times of crisis, those underlying strengths made a tremendous difference. Because the Eastern Roman Empire continued, Roman history did not truly end in the 5th century. The Roman state lived on in another form, centered in Constantinople and shaped by Eastern Mediterranean conditions. This is why the history of Rome stretches far beyond the moment when the Western throne disappeared. Even after the collapse of imperial rule in the West, Roman law, roads, cities, and Christianity continued to shape the societies that followed. This continuity is one of the quiet marvels of history. Political structures may fall, but habits, institutions, and inherited systems can continue living on inside new worlds. The fall of the Western Empire was a long process rather than a single dramatic instant. Dates are useful for historians, but lived reality usually changes more slowly. People continued farming, trading, worshipping, building, and governing in ways that still carried Roman influence, even as political structures shifted around them. Many Roman institutions outlived Roman political control in the West. Administrative habits, legal ideas, language patterns, city life, and religious organization remained active long after emperors no longer ruled there. This endurance is one reason Rome remained present even after Rome had changed. The endurance of Roman influence is one reason the empire remained so central in world history. Rome did not vanish cleanly. It left systems behind. It shaped later thought, later cities, later law, and later language so deeply that it continued to matter even in its absence. Roman legacy can still be seen in modern alphabets, calendars, legal systems, architecture, and languages. These are not small, distant traces. They are parts of everyday life for millions of people. Rome survives not only in ruins, but in habits of reading, writing, counting time, and building. The 12-month calendar is one of the simplest but farthest reaching Roman inheritances. It structures the year so quietly that most people almost never stop to think about its ancient background. Yet in this ordinary rhythm of months, Rome still lingers. The spread of the Latin alphabet is another lasting Roman gift to later history. A person writing in many modern languages is, without realizing it, working within a script tradition deeply shaped by Rome. This is one of the most intimate forms of legacy because it enters directly into daily thought and communication. The Romance languages are among the clearest signs of Rome's long cultural reach. They grew out of Latin over many centuries, changing slowly as spoken language always changes. Their existence shows that Roman influence did not remain frozen in monuments alone. It kept living in the mouths of ordinary people. Later builders repeatedly imitated Roman arches, domes, basilicas, and monumental urban planning. Roman architecture became a model for power, order, and civic grandeur in many later societies. Even when materials and styles changed, Roman forms continued to offer a language of importance and stability. Roman law remained foundational for many later continental legal traditions. This is one reason Roman legal thinking still matters. It shaped later understandings of property, contracts, procedure, and civil order, offering a framework that outlasted the empire itself. Roman ideas of citizenship also continued to influence later political thought, even though ancient citizenship was very different from modern forms. The basic idea that belonging to a political community carries legal meaning and public identity remained powerful long after Rome's own world had changed. Archaeology from places like Pompeii and Roman Britain continues to expand what is known about ordinary life in the empire. These discoveries are especially valuable because they show daily routines, housing, tools, food, and local variation, not only emperors and battles. They let the quieter side of Rome come into view. Museum collections filled with Roman glass, silver, pottery, inscriptions, and portraits reveal how materially rich the empire was. The variety of surviving objects shows that Roman life was expressed through countless crafted things, from luxurious tableware to simple writing surfaces. Material culture carries memory in a patient way. The Roman Empire continues to fascinate people, partly because it brought together military power, urban life, law, spectacle, and cultural mixture on an enormous scale. Few ancient states combined so many different forms of influence in one system. Rome feels large not only in size, but in the number of human experiences it gathered into itself. More than many ancient civilizations, Rome left behind enough roads, ruins, writings, laws, and languages, but its world can still feel surprisingly close to the present. This closeness is part of its unusual power over the imagination. Rome can feel distant in time, yet strangely familiar in structure. Roman roads remained important long after the empire itself weakened, because they had reshaped the movement of people and goods across entire regions. Once such routes existed, later societies often continued using them. In this way, Roman infrastructure guided the future without needing Roman rule to enforce it. Roman cities also continued to matter after political change because urban habits are not easily undone. Markets, walls, streets, churches, and administrative centers often survived transitions in power. A city shaped by Rome could keep carrying Roman forms of life even when new rulers arrived. The memory of Rome endured not only in texts and ruins, but in ideals of order and statehood. Later rulers often wanted to be seen as heirs to Roman authority because Rome had become a symbol of legitimacy, power, and civilized rule. Its memory became a political resource. Roman architecture remained influential because it joined usefulness and grandeur so effectively. An arch or dome was not only beautiful, it also solved real structural problems. That combination made Roman forms endlessly attractive to later builders who wanted strength and symbolism at the same time. Roman language survived in legal and religious vocabulary long after spoken Latin changed into newer forms. Certain terms remained because institutions preserve language carefully. This is one of the slower, quieter ways that Rome stayed alive inside later societies. The survival of Roman Christianity in later European and Mediterranean history also extended Rome's legacy in powerful ways. Even as political authority changed, church organization, sacred language, and inherited traditions carried forward parts of the Roman world. Roman frontiers may have fallen, but the landscapes they shaped did not simply return to an untouched state. Forts, roads, settlements, and military zones changed how people used land and moved through it. Borders leave marks even after the powers that drew them fade away. Roman coinage still helps modern historians reconstruct chronology because coins preserve names, portraits, titles, and symbols in durable form. In a quiet way, money became memory. What once passed from hand to hand in trade now helps scholars rebuild the past. Roman inscriptions are another reason the empire remains unusually visible. Words cut into stone can outlast paper, wood, and fragile objects. Through inscriptions, Roman voices still speak about offices, dedications, tombs, honors, and local civic life. The empire's diversity is part of its legacy too. Rome is not remembered only for imposing sameness, but for managing an enormous range of peoples and traditions within one political framework. That complexity helps explain both its strength and its long fascination. The Eastern Roman Empire preserved many elements of Roman statecraft, law, and identity, while also developing in new directions. This reminds us that legacy is never pure repetition. Rome lasted partly because it could be inherited and transformed at the same time. The city of Constantinople, as the Eastern capital, became one of the greatest examples of Rome's ability to relocate its center while keeping continuity of imperial identity. A state can move, change language balance, and alter its culture, yet still understand itself as the same political tradition. Even the ruins of Roman buildings have had a long afterlife because later generations studied them, copied them, dismantled them, and wondered over them. A ruin is not only a remnant of the past, it is also part of the history of how later people understood that past. Pompeii is especially important because it preserved moments of ordinary Roman life that would otherwise have disappeared almost completely. Streets, houses, food spaces, wall paintings, and small objects remained in place long enough to give modern people a rare sense of lived Roman reality. Roman Britain matters for similar reasons, though in a different way. It shows how Roman life could exist at the edge of the empire, far from the Mediterranean center, and still build roads, towns, forts, and systems of rule that carried a recognizably Roman pattern. North African Roman sites remind us that the empire was never only a European story. Some of its most productive lands and most important provinces lay in Africa, and these regions were central to Roman survival, especially in agriculture and trade. Roman Syria and caravan cities such as Palmyra reveal another face of the empire, one shaped by desert routes, long-distance exchange, and cultural meeting points. Rome was not confined to one kind of landscape. It adapted to many. Roman Egypt, with its records and administrative detail, gives an unusually intimate look at what imperial rule felt like in everyday practice. Through papyri and local documents, the empire becomes less abstract and more human, full of taxes, letters, disputes, and routines. Roman spectacle also left a deep cultural memory, because it demonstrated how power could be staged before huge crowds. Games, ceremonies, and processions taught later societies that politics is often seen as much as it is argued. Public display can shape belief. Roman law left a long legacy partly because it tried to define relationships with care. Property, family, debt, duty, and status were all given names and forms. Once such categories exist, they can travel far beyond the world that first created them. Roman citizenship became historically important not only because of who had it, but because Rome gradually widened it. That expansion helped create the idea that political belonging can be extended beyond a narrow city core, even if Roman motives were practical and imperial. The Roman Empire remains compelling because it joined harsh realities and extraordinary achievements in the same civilization. It built roads and baths, but also relied on slavery and conquest. That tension is part of what makes Rome so worth studying with patience and honesty. When people think about Rome today, they often begin with emperors, wars, or monuments, but the quieter legacies may be even more enduring. A calendar, a law code, an alphabet, a road line, a city plan, a language. For me, these are calm inheritances, yet they travel very far. In the end, Rome is not remembered only because it was powerful, but because so much of what it made continued after its own political form changed. It passed into other worlds and remained there, sometimes clearly, sometimes almost invisibly, as one layer beneath later history. And now, as the long shape of the Roman world softens into the distance, it can be enough to simply remember that even the largest empires eventually become roads, words, stones, habits, and echoes, resting quietly beneath the lives that come after them.